The Vancouver Art Gallery unleashed an epic exhibition of surrealism last month. It is one of the gallery's most ambitious exhibits to date. The show includes the work of 80 leading surrealist artists. It's called The Color of My Dreams. It is my pleasure to welcome the BAG's senior curator, Thom, back to Studio 4 to tell us more. Nice to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I don't know if you heard me in the beginning of the show, but I said Joan Miro, and you tell me it's Juan Miro.
That's correct, yes.
It's
a lot
spelled
of people
Joan.
Yes, a lot of people get confused.
Well, Joan's a guy.
Yeah, but Joan's a guy, and he's one.
See, I admit it. Sometimes I make a slight error.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I hope no art people are offended.
No, I'm sure they won't be offended.
Okay, so surrealism, the roots of it.
Well, the roots of it really are with Freud. I mean, Freud, you know, in the early years of the 20th century began to publish, and the idea that your unconscious mind was equally, if not more important than your conscious mind. And a bunch of artists and writers began to think, well, maybe there are ways to express in artistic production what's going on in your unconscious mind. So the ideas of automatism and doing things without conscious intention, that became very important to the surrealists. They was initially a literary movement led by André Breton in Paris. And he did writings and poetry that was done completely sort of without preconceptions. Like you'd put words together that no one would necessarily put together in a regular sentence.
Sure.
And then, because they didn't think that artists could be surrealists because art takes too much time to make. But artists felt that there was something important there, and eventually Breton was convinced as well and wrote a very important piece in 1928 about surrealist art.
Yeah, the Manifesto of Surrealism.
Yes.
I did read that. I still couldn't pronounce Joan. Juan. I'll get over it.
Yes.
Promise. This show, pretty exciting. 4 years to put together.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's over 350 objects in the show. They come literally from all around the world. And we were fortunate to be able to engage one of the most preeminent scholars on surrealism in the world, a woman named Dawn Adas, who's in London, to work on the exhibition with us. This she says is going to be her surrealist swan song.
Really?
Yes, and she's done shows for the Tate and other places like that before. So.
How impressive. So it's about the mood in the gallery. It's like there's some desire and some dreams, and I'm sure some androgyny and all of those dualism,
things.
A little violence, a lot of odd pictures.
There's some things. Surrealism often presents to you things that you don't expect to see in the same place. There are conjunctions of objects that, I mean, a surrealist object is a classic example of that. For example, they would use things that exist in the world and they would put them together in odd conjunctions, and that becomes a surrealist object. Whereas, of course, the Duchamp earlier had a thing he called a ready-made, where he'd take something like this cup, and he'd say, this is a work of art, because I say it's a work of art.
Oh.
Where the surrealists would take this cup and they would add something to the cup. They might put a little man on the side of the cup or something like that, and that might become a surrealist object.
And now it's surreal. I have a table that's surreal. It has ostrich legs.
Yes, Enrico Donati's table.
Yes, I have that table, and it's silver, and it's fabulous. And on the top of the table are the prints of the claws or the feet.
Yes, yes. And it's not what you'd expect to see in a table.
No,
you expect
that's
four
why I love it.
Very boring legs and a flat top.
I know, it's a work of art for me.
Yes.
Like nobody's allowed to put anything on it at our house.
Yes, well, that's a good idea, Fanny.
Not even the car keys. No, that's not a. It is a table, but it's not a table.
Right.
That's why it's surreal. So Magritte.
Well, the greatest Belgian surrealist by far.
Yeah, René Magritte.
An extraordinary individual. I mean, these works that are strangely evocative. This is a good example called Six Elements. I mean, and you see, fire, you see the air, you see a bit of a building, you see a forest, and these kind of bell-like objects. And what it actually means, it's up to you to decide for yourself.
That's good.
There's no singular meaning for any of these objects.
No, and what a mind. But our unconscious is complex, as you know.
Oh, indeed, very complex.
No wonder. Ask Freud if he was around.
Yes, although Freud's relationship to the surrealists was quite interesting, because a lot of them were very much inspired by him, and he didn't have a lot of time for them. And so there's a famous story about Dali being introduced to Freud in London. He was just desperate to meet him, and then Freud then, after the meeting, wrote to a friend and said, "Well, I've always thought that surrealists, for the most part, were fools.
Right.
But after having met Salvador Dali, I've changed my mind. I've decided he's a very good Spaniard."
Well, we all had, I don't know if you did, but I had a Salvador Dali poster, the infamous poster on my wall at university.
Right.
Didn't know much about him, but
well, I mean,
who didn't have a Salvador Dali something?
Dali is inconceivable without the ideas of Freud. But I mean, they were interested in the occult, they were interested in spiritualism, they were interested in all kinds of things that, you know, you would do that unexpectedly. I mean, our exhibition is an exhibition about surrealism. It's not a surrealist exhibition, because a lot of the surrealists, they created entire environments. You'd walk in and there'd be like strange smells and floors covered with twigs, and it smelled of coffee and coal dust coming down to you on you from the ceiling. It's all sorts of things you just simply don't expect. They tried to take what was expected about art and totally changes people's opinion.
It's surreal. The lobster telephone now.
Yes.
Speaking of Dali. And did he work with somebody on that?
Well, there's a number of stories about how that came about. There was a man named Edward James, who was a very, very wealthy British collector. And what he decided to do at one point is he bought every single thing that Dali made for 2 years. And so Dali was obviously fairly friendly towards him. And they apparently had an extremely raucous party one day with lots of champagne and lobsters. And legend has it, at one point Dali threw a lobster shell off, and it landed on a telephone, and they decided, oh, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's art.
That's art.
Well, I was just at the Martin Creed show a couple of times because I found it fascinating at the Rennie Gallery.
Right.
And as you walked through pink balloons, and then you'd go down to the lower level, and there'd be a grand piano opening and closing, opening and closing. And that's art.
Well, yes, but I mean,
but it's
someone
not
like
surreal. His work is not surreal.
Well, Martin Creed, though, and people like Damien Hirst and a whole range of other contemporary artists, they build on the example of what the surrealists did.
Okay, because there's an influence there for sure.
Yeah, they allowed them to be more experimental.
Okay, let's look at Ophelia.
Ophelia, yes.
Ophelia. This is about what year? 37, somewhere in there. It's all like 1929s, 30s, 43s,
yeah, I
44s.
mean, essentially it's largely a phenomenon of the interwar period, although surrealism officially ended in 66 when Breton dies. This is a Masson picture. I mean, and obviously they were interested in Shakespeare, but this Shakespeare in a very strange way. You've got this weird sort of like insect figure, you know, that's playing a tune as she's drowning in the pond. I mean, and the perceptions of space or something that you don't expect. I mean, there's no surrealist object or painting would ever have space that would have conventional perspective in it.
And the people who did this, the artists who did this, did any of them live like normal lives?
Oh, some of them led very normal lives. I mean, René Magritte led an extremely normal life. He had a very nice wife, and he had a nice house in Brussels, and you know, and actually later in his life, the photographer Dwayne Michaels went to Brussels to document how ordinary Magritte's life was, and wearing his nice bowler hat.
Really? So it was before Lucy Fell from the Sky with Diamonds.
Yes.
Before that LSD.
Yes, indeed.
Well, maybe not before, but it wasn't drug fueled, is the point.
No.
Because it's so odd and amazing and wonderful, really.
It was really doing things like, for example, the surrealists had invented a game called the Cadavre Esquisse, or the Exquisite Corpse. And what you do with it is you fold it a piece of paper into multiple sections. And the first person would be given the piece of paper, and they'd draw something, and then they'd fold it over so you couldn't see what it was. And then the next person hand it to the next person, and then you'd create this thing, and you unfolded it, and it was this completely odd and strange, object that created. We've got an entire room devoted to those in the exhibition.
How fabulous!
Because it's a game they play.